What if the cities we call modern are already living decades ahead of our imagination, hiding wonders most international travelers have yet to witness? Across soaring towers, luminous streets, and sprawling urban grids, human ambition and technology converge to create landscapes that feel almost unreal. In Las Vegas, a glowing lead sphere dominates the skyline while electric vehicles navigate streets pulsing with kinetic energy. A cityscape alive with spectacle and innovation. Hong Kong rises in dense vertical layers where commerce, life, and light stack upon each other, compressing space and experience into astonishing precision. Singapore earns its reputation as a city in a garden, where towers rise from lush green canopies and nature blends seamlessly with design. And even its airport hosts a soaring indoor waterfall beneath a vast glass dome, turning transit itself into a futuristic experience. What forces of design, technology, and ambition guide these urban marvels? And how far can human ingenuity push the boundaries of our built world? Join us as we explore these impossible places, uncovering the innovations and visions that define the cities of tomorrow. Las Vegas, often called the entertainment capital of the world, rises out of the desert as a living prototype of the future. A cityscape built to blur the line between everyday reality and science fiction. To the north of the main strip, the first clean shaft of light that pierces the night comes from the glass pyramidal, Luxor. Its narrow beam shoots straight into the sky like a silent signal being sent out from the edge of the planet. If you follow that glow, you drift into the rhythm of Fremont Street, where a giant LED canopy replaces the open sky and pours waves of color in motion overhead, turning an ordinary step forward into the feeling of walking through a digital gateway under that artificial firmament. Casino floors begin to feel less like simple halls of neon, and more like the city's central nervous system with spinning reels, clattering chips, and fast hands of cards feeding a current of energy that never seems to shut off. Just when it feels as if Las Vegas has already shown you every trick it knows, the luminous curve of the sphere suddenly dominates the horizon, rising at the edge of the strip like a man-made moon that has decided to park above the parking lots. The huge globe stands over 300 feet tall and is wrapped in more than 1 million individually controlled points of light, turning its surface into a seamless digital skin that can become a rotating planet, a blinking human eye, or any bold image the city wants to cast into the night. Step inside and a vast curved screen together, with a dense array of precisely aimed speakers folds the show around you so that for a while it feels less like you are watching a performance and more like you have been dropped into the center of the world it is projecting. Farther south, the dark form of Allegiant Stadium appears like a grounded starship. Its black glass shell and opening roof glowing softly as if it were preparing for launch rather than a football game. In a nearby shopping complex, the Tipsy Robot Bar reveals a quieter corner of this future-leaning city, where robotic arms calmly mix, shake, and pour cocktails under gentle colored light. their mechanical choreography replacing small talk with perfect, repeatable precision. Beneath the sidewalks, the Vegas loop hums along in hidden tunnels, moving autonomous Teslas between major resorts so quickly and smoothly that short hops across town begin to feel more like brief jumps through a private transit tube than a normal ride. Out beyond the glow of the Strip, a sprawling factory complex in the desert turns out electric motors, battery packs, and hardware for new kinds of power grids, feeding a growing network of high-speed charging stations and software-guided vehicles that is spreading across the highways of the country. Back on the streets, angular Cybertrucks slip through the neon haze, their stainless steel panel sketching and slicing reflections from the billboards so cleanly that each passing moment looks borrowed from a science fiction frame. When all of these lights, machines, and systems are seen together against the desert sky, Las Vegas feels less like a city, simply racing toward the future, and more like a place, actively rewriting what the future of everyday life can look like. Dubai has been remade from a strip of desert into a futuristic coastal city in just about 50 years. A place where the skyline often feels closer to science fiction than to the sand it rose from. To sense that shift, you can begin at the Dubai Frame, a lone golden rectangle rising from a park at the edge of the city, like an oversized doorway standing open to the sky. Step under its crossbar and look through, and one direction fills with low markets, older streets, and flat neighborhoods that still remember the days before skyscrapers, metro lines, or palm-shaped coastlines existed at all. Let your gaze turn slowly the other way, and the same opening suddenly gathers glass towers and elevated roads into a single vertical picture, like a ledger of ambition written upward into the sky. Following that line of steel and glass toward the water, the Burj Khalifa gradually separates from the cluster, a narrow spire climbing to more than 2,700 feet until its tip seems to stitch the hazy sky closed. Inside, floors of apartments, lounges, pools, and private clubs fold into a tall, stacked neighborhood linked by elevators fast enough to make a jump of dozens of stories feel like nothing more than changing streets. At its base, sound and motion draw you toward the edge of an artificial lake where the Dubai fountain throws arcs of water almost 500 feet into the air. Jets and lights moving in time with music during shows that repeat several times a night. Stay by the rail, and the scene thickens as fireworks burst in careful clusters above the water. LED waves roll down the faces of nearby towers, and riders on water-powered jetpacks sweep out over the pool in bright curves that look borrowed from a superhero film. Following the curve of the shoreline away from the crowds, the coast stops reading as a simple line when Palm Jumeirah unfurls into the Gulf as a vast palm-shaped extension of land, covering around 2 square miles of shallow sea. A long central trunk and 17 narrow fronds carry hotels, towers, and rows of villas with private strips of sand. And engineers like to say that the sand and rock set here could build a low wall encircling the earth several times. Turning back inland along the highway, another emblem of this imagined future comes into view as the Museum of the Future appears above the traffic. A stainless steel oval with a hollow center framing pieces of sky and city. Its smooth skin is cut into flowing Arabic script rather than ordinary windows. More than 1,000 unique panels shaped and carved by robots, then lit from within so that verses about tomorrow glow across the metal in an unbroken loop of handwriting that many visitors never forget. Let that glowing script lead you farther out to Expo City, where the open plazas gather beneath the wide Al Wasl Dome and its fine mesh canopy stretched like a net of steel above the ground. After dark, that mesh becomes a full 360-degree projection surface, a floating shell of light and film under which delivery robots hum between pavilions, while self-driving shuttles and prototype air taxis trace smooth demonstration routes. In one mirrored pavilion, a skin of solar panels wraps the exterior, while inside, augmented reality desserts climb the walls in vertical layers, turning sun, sand, and image into a controlled mirage of the wider region. When you finally step back from these separate scenes, the frame, the spire, the fountain, the artificial island, the glowing ring, and the domed test bed, they no longer feel like isolated attractions competing for attention. Together, they read as linked experiments on open display. A desert nation using its own land, light, and water to draft and redraft its version of the future in real time. Asterisk. Singapore presents itself as a dense, high-tech island city that also behaves like a vast urban garden where infrastructure, climate control, and greenery are designed as a single system. Along the bay, glass towers frame the water, while Marina Bay Sands ties the skyline together. 3 slender blocks leaning toward Oninither beneath a rooftop deck shaped like a ship resting across their crowns. From a distance, it is the familiar postcard image of a city that designs for spectacle. But the closer you get, the more you realize how much of that spectacle was built from living systems rather than bare concrete and glass. Instead of squeezing a few lawns between highways and offices, Singapore set out to build the green fabric first and then wove its streets, transit lines, and buildings into it, with nearly 1/2 of its land area reserved as green space. In the financial district, the towers at Marina One fold inward, around a sheltered central void where a compact rainforest climbs through the courtyard with more than 300 plant species cooling the air and softening the hard edges of the surrounding walls. Nearby, the Oasia Hotel wraps its red metal mesh in layers of climbing plants so that the facade behaves more like a vertical garden than a sealed wall of glass, giving the building a sense of breathing in step with the heat, rain, and wind. Follow the shoreline, and the most theatrical pieces of this garden city come into view as a pair of smooth glass domes rises from the waterfront, like low transparent hills at the edge of the bay. Inside the cloud forest dome, a cool artificial mist hangs around a tall cascade of water. A waterfall about 115 feet high spilling down through ferns, orchids, and hanging gardens, while spiral walkways lead visitors up through the canopy. It does not feel like a simple greenhouse display. It feels like a carefully tuned ecosystem under glass, calibrated to hold on to a mountain climate in the middle of a tropical harbor. Outside, the super tree grove stands, like a small steel forest with artificial trunks reaching almost 165 feet into the air and branching into broad canopies that shade the paths and frame the ski. Each structure quietly works for the park below, helping to collect rainwater, generate solar power, and vent warm air, turning what could have been a simple light show into a piece of outdoor infrastructure that earns its place. After dark, these same canopies pulse with shifting color and synchronized waves. So the garden becomes a slow glowing performance where function and spectacle are impossible to separate. Even the airport has been pulled into this green logic as Jewel Changi guides arriving travelers, not into a bare concourse, but into a high atrium planted like a forest. At its center, the rain vortex drops from a circular opening in the roof into a pool surrounded by more than 2,000 trees and shrubs, making the world's tallest indoor waterfall feel less like a stunt and more like the heart of a living plaza. Down by the water's edge, Marina Barrage stretches across the mouth of the bay as a broad, low dam that keeps storm tides away from downtown, while its grassy roof rolls gently up to form a public lawn facing the skyline. It is climate engineering at the scale of an entire harbor, but it also reads as another park where people picnic, ride bikes, and watch the very weather that the structure is quietly holding in check. Underneath all of this, national plans point in the same direction, with Singapore pledging to plant about 1 million additional trees by the year 2000, and 30 tough-as-out gasoline vehicles around the early 2040s, and to expand its solar capacity several times over as it treats sustainability not as an accessory, but as a core industry of its future. Tokyo feels like a city that has pulled the future out into the open, stacking towers and rail lines and screens while about 37 million people move through it each day in the most populated metro area on Earth. In districts like Shinjuku, neon seems to spill from every surface, with digital billboards climbing rough lighten stories high in signs in what feels like every major language, turning light pollution into a kind of urban infrastructure. For a while, you could even rent Asmo go-kart, dress up like a video game character, and drive through real Tokyo traffic. A stunt so popular it triggered lawsuits over Nintendo, copyrights and safety rules, because the streets themselves had become the game. Ride a few stations away, and the current of people gathers again at the Shibuya Scramble, where nearly 3,000 people can cross in a single light cycle during peak hours. A swirl of bodies that somehow flows without collisions or hesitation. Film crews capture that intersection over and over as the purest picture of organized chaos. A human tide folding and unfolding on cue in the middle of the city. Zoom out from the crossing to the tracks that tie Japan together, and the Shinkansen bullet trains cut through the landscape at about 200 miles per hour. Carrying passengers from Tokyo to Osaka in roughly 2.5 hours, with departures every 3 minutes during the rush. Across the entire system, the average delay is only about half a minute, a level of precision that makes the whole country feel as if it runs on a shared clock. Under all of this motion, Tokyo's power grid leans on artificial intelligence to balance electricity across thousands of microgrids, keeping lights, trains, and screens running for more people than many nations will ever hold. Taken together, the crossings, trains, arcades of neon, and invisible networks make Tokyo feel less like a crowded city and more like a living circuit board, humming steadily as it moves the future through itself all day long. Chongqing rises where the Yangtze River meets the Jialing, a mountain city that looks as if a full-scale metropolis has been stacked onto cliffs that were never meant to hold this much glass and light. Within about 50 years, it has grown from an industrial backwater into a layered home for roughly 31 million people, built upward and inward because the slopes and riverbanks leave almost nowhere flat to expand. Following the river as it bends, you find Hongya clinging to the cliff. A cascade of timber balconies and red lanterns, stepping down toward the water like a hillside village that never stopped growing. As darkness settles in, those wooden facades begin to glow, warm amber light spilling from level after level until the whole structure feels like a single lantern hanging above the river. Across the water, more than 200 towers answer at once, their exteriors lighting up in choreographed waves of color for about 15 minutes as animations run across the skyline. In that short span, buildings become screens, the water turns into a mirror, and the view looks so much like a science fiction frame that people routinely compare the city to a live-action Blade Runner shot. Where the two rivers bend sharply, Raffles City pushes a cluster of 8 skyscrapers out over the point, so close together that they seem to lean into one another for balance. Near their crowns, a long horizontal volume known as the Crystal stretches between the towers like a glass ship, floating roughly 1,000 feet above the traffic and docks below. From its windows, the city appears more vertical than horizontal. Roads looping over roads, highways hanging in the air, and ramps twisting through the high rises like a maze of elevated routes. Just when you think the layering cannot get stranger, a metro line slides straight through the middle of a residential tower at Liziba Station. Not around it, but through a platform carved into about the 8th floor. Commuters step off the train into the heart of the building. The cars rumble out the far side, and for a moment, the walls shake as if the entire tower were only another section of track. Even the shopping malls lean into this surreal geometry. Inside the Ring Shopping Park, full-grown trees hang from the ceiling with their roots exposed, suspended through 7 floors of artificial rainforest that drop away beneath your feet. Taken together, the cliffside houses, sky bridges, light shows, and trains punching through concrete make Chongqing feel like a city that never explicitly set out to look futuristic, but simply kept building faster than the map could catch up until the future became its default shape. Hainan on China's southern fringe is being staged as a tropical future island, a blend of free trade port and resort laboratory set in turquoise water. Behind the beaches, long-term plans call for the whole island to function as a full free trade port by about 2035 with 0 tariff imports, electric transport networks, and largely carbon-neutral energy humming in the background. Follow the shoreline, and Sanya International Duty-Free City appears like a coastal boulevard of glass, one of the largest luxury retail complexes on Earth. Part shopping mall, part resort, part architectural statement. At its center, the Pineapple Shopping Mall catches your eye first. A golden fruit-shaped shell wrapping roughly 1.6 million square feet of retail in faceted playful geometry. Drift a little farther along the coast, and the Grand Tree Hotel rises in 9 enormous tree-like towers. Their trunks, branches, and metal leaves shifting color with the seasons, while about 6,700 rooms are scattered through the canopy. Beyond that ring of towers, Ocean Flower Island spreads over the shallows as 3 man-made flower-shaped islets covering roughly 2,000 acres, about 1.5 times the size of Dubai's Palm Jumeirah, built with an investment on the order of $24 billion. Together, the duty-free boulevards, fruit-shaped malls, tree towers, and offshore islands are meant to brand Hainan as a future Hawaii of China, where high-end retail and leisure are fused directly into the coastline. The architecture rarely follows ordinary rules. Hotels grow like stylized trees. Shopping centers mimic tropical fruit, and islands bloom as oversized flowers drawn onto the sea. Hainan does not whisper about its direction. It leans into a sun-soaked, slightly surreal form of tropical futurism, turning the entire province into a bright engineered dream of escape. Seoul has evolved into a city where high-speed connectivity, dense urban life, and global pop culture all run in parallel, turning the capital into South Korea's main stage for both business and entertainment. Its economy is driven by technology, design, and manufacturing, with major electronics firms, game studios, and startups sharing districts with small workshops and neighborhood cafes. Beneath that creative surface is a transport network built for constant motion, with extensive subways, buses, and expressways knitting together riverfront towers, hillside neighborhoods, and vast residential zones on the edge of the city. Digital payments, delivery apps, and online services are so deeply embedded in daily life that ordering food, shopping for essentials, or managing finances can all happen from a phone in a few quiet taps. At the same time, Seoul exports its own image to the world through music, film, fashion, and beauty, turning K-pop drama series and street style into a kind of soft power that reaches far beyond the peninsula. Visitors often notice how easily the old and the new sit side by side, with traditional markets and historic districts only a short ride away from glass towers in busy commercial streets. Taken together, Seoul feels less like a single center and more like a network of urban villages wired together. a living example of how a modern Asian metropolis can combine technology, culture, and everyday routine on a continuous rhythm. Hong Kong is one of the most densely populated urban regions on Earth, a harbor city where steep hills, islands, and limited flat ground have forced development to grow upward instead of outward. Residential districts often feel like forests of high rises with narrow towers packed close together, and thousands of compact apartments stacked above street markets, corner stores, and transit stops. For many families, home means a small unit carefully organized to fit sleeping, cooking, and storage into just a few tightly used rooms, making every shelf and doorway part of the floor plan. Daily life runs on elevators and stairwells as much as on sidewalks, with schools, clinics, and supermarkets often built into the podiums of housing blocks so that most essentials can be reached without ever leaving the neighborhood. From higher floors, you see balcony after balcony and window after window, an almost continuous wall of living space that shows how much the city relies on vertical living to house its people. At the edge of this dense fabric, the shoreline opens out to wide stretches of open water, crossed by long sea bridges that tie Hong Kong more closely to the mainland and nearby cities. They also act as visible symbols of connection, stretching over shipping lanes and shallow seas to link financial districts, industrial zones, ports, and residential areas into a single economic region. Between its crowded residential towers on the hillsides and its sweeping bridges over the sea, Hong Kong tells a clear story of a city that has learned to create space where there was almost none to begin with. Shanghai has grown into one of the strongest economic engines on the Asian coast, producing goods and services worth well over $1 trillion in value each year. Its wider urban region is home to well over 20 million residents, many of whom live in dense high-rise districts that are directly connected to offices, factories, schools, and riverfront facilities. A deep water port linked to the mainland by long sea bridges pushes trade out across the oceans, turning Shoreline into a continuous belt of docks, warehouses, and transport hubs on land. Inner and outer ring roads wrap around the city and feed into a web of expressways, allowing trucks, buses, and private cars to move between older neighborhoods, new development zones, and the suburbs without stopping at every intersection. Bridges and tunnels cross the main river at many points, while thousands of smaller road and rail bridges knit together areas that were once separated by waterways, marsh, or rail yards. For residents, this means it is possible to live in one part of the city, work in another, and still reach airports, stations, and waterfronts in a single continuous chain of trains and roads. Taken together, Shanghai's layered network of ports, bridges, highways, and rail lines makes the city feel less like a single urban core and more like a fully integrated coastal system built to handle the next stage of urban growth. Asterisk, asterisk. Chengdu has grown from a regional capital into one of Western China's main urban powerhouses, known as much for its relaxed lifestyle as for its rapid economic expansion. In recent decades, the city has shifted from primarily manufacturing and government services toward a more balanced mix that includes technology, finance, logistics, and creative industries. New business districts and development zones have spread out from the historic core, with dense clusters of offices, apartments, and shopping streets forming along broad boulevards and ring roads. A growing metro network, extensive bus lines, and high-speed rail connections link Chengdu to surrounding towns and other major cities, turning it into a transport hub for much of the interior. The expansion of a modern airport system has made it easier for travelers and trade to move in and out, reinforcing the city's role as a gateway between coastal China and the west of the country. Despite this growth, Chengdu has invested heavily in parks, riverside walks, and green corridors so that many neighborhoods still feel walkable and shaded even as high-rises continue to appear. For residents, this combination of big city services and a slower daily rhythm has become part of Chengdu's identity, drawing in students, professionals, and families from across the region. Taken together, the expanding transport links, diversified economy, and emphasis on livability make Chengdu feel like a model for how an inland city can grow into a modern metropolis without losing its sense of ease. Silicon Valley is less a single city than a continuous innovation corridor in Northern California, where research, engineering, and investment have been layered at each other for more than half a century. Here, a dense concentration of universities, laboratories, and technology firms channels a very large share of the world's private research and development, spending into just a few neighboring counties. The region regularly produces new waves of technology, from personal computers and the early internet to smartphones, artificial intelligence, and clean energy tools that later become standard infrastructure in cities around the globe. a deep pool of venture capital, legal and advisory services, and experienced founders creates an ecosystem where thousands of startups can test ideas, fail quickly, or scale up without having to leave the region. Average incomes in many valley communities rank among the highest in the United States, reflecting the value placed on specialized skills in software, hardware design, data science, and advanced manufacturing. At the same time, high land values, limited housing supply, and strong demand have pushed home prices and rents to levels that make affordability one of the area's most visible challenges. Public debates in the region increasingly focus on how to use technology and policy to address these side effects. Issues like climate resilience, transportation, and social equity rather than innovation alone. Taken as a whole, Silicon Valley functions as a kind of living prototype for a knowledge-based economy, showcasing both the opportunities and the challenges and the pressures that come with concentrating so much intellectual and financial power in one place. Copenhagen has shifted from a traditional industrial port into one of Northern Europe's more dynamic growth capitals with a strong focus on knowledge, services, and innovation. Over recent decades, its economy has moved steadily toward design, technology, finance, and green industries, turning the city into a regional hub for high-value work rather than heavy manufacturing. The wider urban area now holds well over 1 million people, supported by expanding housing districts, modern offices, and upgraded transport links that tie the center to surrounding municipalities. Investment in rail, metro, and regional links has made it easier for commuters and businesses to spread out, while still staying connected to a shared labor market. Former docklands and industrial sites have been redeveloped into mixed urban neighborhoods, adding homes, workplaces, and public spaces without pushing growth far into the countryside. At the same time, long-term climate and energy goals have driven demand for new technologies, helping the city position itself as a testbed for clean solutions and resilient infrastructure. Internationalists often highlight Copenhagen as a leading example of how a mid-size capital can combine economic competitiveness with environmental policies and social stability. Astana has been developed as a purpose-built capital in the heart of Kazakhstan, designed to symbolize the country's shift toward a modern, internationally connected economy. Over a few decades, it has grown from a relatively small city into a national political, administrative, and business center with a population of well over 1 million people. Large government districts, financial institutions, and corporate offices are laid out along broad avenues, signaling the city's role as a place where national decisions and major investments are concentrated. Continuous construction has added new residential areas, business parks, and public buildings, giving the skyline a mix of contemporary architecture and wide open spaces uncommon in older capitals. Transport links by road, rail, and air tie Astana to other major cities in the region, allowing it to function as a hub for both domestic travel and international connections. Ongoing projects in digital infrastructure, education, and services aim to position the city as a center for innovation and high-skilled work, not only for Kazakhstan, but for Central Asia more broadly. At the same time, investment in utilities, heating systems, and urban services has been necessary to support year-round life in a place known for its long, harsh winters. International forums, cultural events, and diplomatic activities are increasingly hosted here, reinforcing its status as the country's sexternal face to the world. Taken together, Astana's rapid expansion, planned layout, and growing institutional role make it a clear example of a capital city, being used as a strategic tool for national development. Has spent recent decades channeling its energy, wealth into dense urban development, transport networks, and large-scale public projects. New districts with high-rise housing, offices, and waterfront promenades now surround the capital, supported by multi-lane highways, a modern metro system, and a major international airport that links the country to cities on 3 continents. Stadiums, exhibition centers, museums, and cultural venues have been built in clusters, allowing the same urban fabric to host global tournaments, conferences, and tourism throughout the year. Universities, research hubs, and education complexes add a knowledge layer to an economy that once depended almost entirely on oil and gas, drawing students and professionals from many regions. National income per person ranks among the highest in the world. And public investment in utilities, healthcare, and services has reshaped living standards for a relatively small citizen population. In the skyline and on the ground, Qatar presents itself as a tightly focused Gulf state that uses rapid construction and infrastructure to secure a lasting role in 21st century trade, travel, and diplomacy. Valencia has grown into a major Mediterranean city where port activity, services, and tourism all carry real weight in the local economy. Its seaport ranks among busiest on the Spanish coast, handling large volumes of containers and linking factories and farms in the hinterland to shipping routes across Europe and beyond. Around the harbor and logistic zones, new business areas, hotels, and residential projects have filled in old industrial land, turning former working docks into mixed urban districts. Inside the city, universities, research centers, and tech companies add an innovation layer to traditional sectors like food processing, ceramics, and manufacturing. Rail and highway links connect Valencia quickly to Madrid, Barcelona, and other regional centers, while a modern airport supports steady flows of visitors and business travel. Public investment has reshaped riverbeds and former industrial corridors into parks, bike routes, and public space that sit alongside office blocks and apartment buildings. Together, these patterns show a city that is still building out its role on the Mediterranean, strengthening trade and jobs while steadily upgrading its urban fabric.